Now on to a GB News exclusive. A Rotherham sexual exploitation survivor was ordered to remove a demand for her abuser to be deported, GB News can reveal. The woman gave a moving statement in Sheffield Crown Court last week, over 20 years after she was groomed and abused from the age of just 11 by the Pakistani heritage men. But the judge made her remove any reference to deporting her offenders. So today I'm asking, should we deport foreign criminals, especially the perpetrators of grooming gang crimes? And joining us in the studio is the man who gave us that exclusive story, our national reporter, Charlie Peters. Charlie, I just want to say again, you know, well done. You went to that court in Sheffield last week. You were the only national reporter who bothered to show up to listen to these girls who waited years and years and years for their moment. And then to learn they were denied the full moment because their statement was censored. It's an astonishing story. Why did they censor her words?
Well, just before that survivor came into the courtroom to stand in the witness stand to be next to the judge and speak directly to those 7 defendants in the dock ahead of their sentencing, to tell them they'd lost. They'd taken her childhood, they'd taken her innocence, but she said, I'm a survivor, I'm a fighter, I am your karma, I'm now taking your freedom. As she prepared to do that, before she came into the room, the CPS barrister spoke with the judge and said that any discussion about whether or not they, the abusers, remain in this country is for the Home Office, not this court. Now, I heard that being discussed, and I made a small note of it. And after the extremely emotional and powerful delivery from that survivor towards those defendants was delivered, she passed me the full details of her victim impact statement, which included the line, I'd like to request that 2 of the defendants are deported after they serve their sentence. They arrive in this country to exploit children. She wants them to go back. She was not permitted to say that. Her closing in the courtroom was extremely powerful, as I said, very emotional, very well delivered. The defendants looked anywhere but towards her. At one point, I had a short moment of eye contact with one of the defendants as he looked anywhere but towards the witness box. But the real conclusion she wanted to deliver was to demand that 2 of those men, who she says are Pakistani-born, they're still Pakistani nationals, should be deported. That demand comes as many other grooming gang abusers have not been deported by the Home Office. In another notorious case in Rochdale, a man who was described as a ringleader of an appalling abuse gang then, called Kari Ralph, a decade after his sentencing, has still not been deported. He's still living in the community, and hundreds of thousands of pounds of legal aid has been spent on him fighting his deportation case. But in this case, in Sheffield Crown Court last week, the sentencing was handed down. Some of the most severe sentences I've seen in my records for grooming gang abusers. One of 24 years, another of 25 years. They were described as cunning and evil sexual predators. But the opportunity for the survivor to say, get them out of Britain, was not permitted.
Charlie Peters, stick with us. We'll come back to you in a moment. But I'm now joined by the Reform UK MP for Great Yarmouth, Rupert Lowe, who joins me. Rupert, welcome to the show. This is an astonishing story. Charlie Peters also told me in the last hour that with his investigation, not a single grooming gang, foreign-born national, has been deported from the United Kingdom throughout all of the years of these terrible, terrible cases coming to light. There's been a huge political outpouring in reaction to what we've discovered here at GB News. Rupert Lowe, I know you were very passionate earlier. You feel that the system, it sticks up for the perpetrators and not the survivors. How can this be right?
Well, it does always seem that way, Martin. Thank you for having me on your show. It's nice to see a fellow West Midlands Brexit Party MEP. Yeah, it seems that way. It seems that the system is skewed towards protecting those people who perpetrate crime rather than suffer it. And I think it's quite extraordinary that the judge in this case redacted the line which the victim wanted to put in about deporting her sort of the miscreant offenders. I think it's another example of a two-tier judiciary, which effectively is in line with the two-tier policing that we've seen. And do you know what, Martin? I actually think it's indicative that the establishment can see the post-war plan for a multicultural society is gradually failing. I think the British people can see that, possibly with the exception of London, which I think is almost a lost cause. But I think the rest of the country is still very sound, and quite rightly, they have grave concerns about it. So I think it's extraordinary that the judge should have intervened in that way. And as you know, earlier today I put out a tweet. I mean, there are something over 10,000 foreign criminals languishing in our prisons. And I think if people come here and they commit crime, they should be sent home. And if they've got dependents who are relying on their presence here, the dependents should be sent home as well. I really don't see why British pensioners should suffer and pay for these people when ultimately many of them are going to freeze this winter. It's quite extraordinary, Martin.
Rupert Lowe, the figures are astonishing. As you say, it's around about 10,300, including almost 1,500 Albanians, 856 Polish, 758 Romanians. The list goes on and on and on. And none of them have been deported of that 10,000. Rupert, I'm joined in the studio by Charlie Peters, who broke this exclusive story. He'd like to ask you a question now.
Rupert, you've seen the reaction, I'm sure, from lots of Conservative MPs to this story on the judge removing that line from the victim impact statement. Neil O'Brien, Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick saying this is a disgrace and that victims will not be silenced. What's been your reaction to those statements from Conservatives? And do you feel as though the Conservatives have done enough to support justice for grooming gang victims?
Well, of course not. No, I mean, the Conservatives had an 80-seat majority and they squandered it. So I think it's pretty dangerous for them to start throwing stones. They say people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Well, they've had a chance to put this right and they've failed. I don't necessarily blame Suella Braverman or Robert Jenrick as such, but I think they shouldn't necessarily be saying or criticising when they had an opportunity to correct this. I think they failed to do that, and therefore they're highlighting that failure by commenting on this situation. Reform, we would be very strong on this. We're quite clear that it's the victims who should be protected. It's the people who suffer from crime, who are honest, decent members of society. The law should be there to protect them, not the miscreant.
And Rupert, we've had a reaction from the Home Office last night. A spokesperson very briefly told me that it wouldn't comment on individual cases. But I've not heard at all from any Labour MPs. Why do you think there's been such a mood of silence from them and indeed the rest of the broadcast media on this issue today?
I honestly don't know, but I'm having trouble myself getting information out of various government departments. And I'm an MP, I can actually ask questions. And they're very reluctant to often answer those questions which they think might be in any way sensitive. And you know what? That's not the way that an honest democracy should operate. People should have access transparently to information. Government departments should collect it and they should disseminate it in an honest way so that people can actually see what's going on in their society, which ultimately the taxpayer is paying for. So I think there is room for huge improvement in the way in which government is transparent about figures for all sorts of issues which are now of great concern to the British people.
Rupert, could I quickly ask for your opinion on a separate matter, and that is the ongoing scandal of the donations to the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, and his wife, receiving lots of suits and frocks and spectacles, and ask you for this because, of course, you famously donate your entire political salary to charity. So I think you're well placed to comment. What do you think about the idea that Sir Keir Starmer promised to clean up politics, get rid of the sleaze, no more cronyism, no more freebies, and yet here we are, seems like Groundhog Day?
Well, I think I can comment on this one, Martin, without being accused of throwing stones in a glass house. Yes, I'm giving my parliamentary salary, my net parliamentary salary to local Great Yarmouth charities because I'm in this not for money. I'm in this ultimately to vocationally change the way in which we're governed. I would never trust a bought man, Martin, and I think by accepting gifts or money or, allowing people to buy dresses for your wife or spend their money on designer sunglasses or new suits for you. Frankly, I find it mystifying, and I would also actually be ashamed if I let somebody else buy my wife's clothes for her, particularly if I was as rich as Keir Starmer. So, you know, he is a bought man. It worries me greatly. As I said earlier on another TV interview, I would rather be represented by somebody who shows me what they are rather than tries to be something that they're not. And it's disappointing to see that, you know, our Prime Minister is not only falling into this trap, but also, I think in this case, failing to disclose correctly to the parliamentary forces that be.
OK, well, thanks for joining us, then. That's the Reform UK MP for Great Yarmouth, Rupert Lowe. Of course, Keir Starmer denies he's broken any rules, but thank you for joining us on the show this afternoon. Thank you very much. Now, I'll have lots more on that story, of course, at 5 o'clock. And there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com, and you've helped to make it the fastest-growing national news website in the country. So thank you very much. And thank you to Charlie Peters for that story.